Okay, welcome to Legal Tech Week for May 14th, 2021. This is Bob Ambrogi. I am the editor of the blog Law Sites and also host of my own podcast, Law Next. And this is the show in which we talk about the week's top stories in legal tech and innovation. And very happy to have a guest panelist with us today. Jeff Brandt, welcome to the show. Jeff is the editor of the Pinhawk Law Technology Daily Digest and the Chief Information Officer at the law firm Jackson Kelly. And I don't know about you all, but that Law Technology Daily Digest is one of my very short list of must reads on a daily basis. So
thank you, Bob, and thank you for inviting me.
And the rest of you, let's go around and introduce ourselves. Steve, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Steve Embry. I publish the blog Tech Law Crossroads. I practiced law for, over 35 years with a big law firm, and actually got my start as a young associate at the Jackson Kelly firm in Charleston, West Virginia, and have very fond memories of my time there, and so glad to see you on the show, Jeff.
Thanks.
Yep. Molly?
I'm Molly McDonough. I am a former editor and publisher of the ABA Journal and currently a media consultant and strategist based in the Chicago area. I also produce the podcast Legal Talk Today with the Legal Talk Network.
And straight from Clubhouse, Caroline Hill.
Yeah, hi, Caroline Hill. I'm editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, which is legaltechnology.com. Doesn't actually sound the same. Based in the UK, it's 8 p.m. It's been a long week. Nice to see everyone.
Victoria.
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria Hudgins. I'm a reporter with Legal Tech News. I'm based in Philadelphia and I cover technology, cybersecurity, and how lawyers are using tech.
Zach Warren.
Hey there, everybody. My name is Zach Warren. I'm the editor-in-chief of ALM's Legal Tech News. Big week for me. It was actually my birthday yesterday, and today is my 2 weeks clear of second vaccine dose. So I was considering joining you, Caroline, but I think I'm going to hold off at least for right now.
Well, congratulations. I hope you're going to still go out and celebrate this weekend anyway. And last but not least, Victor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Lee, assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal, covering law. I'm kind of in La La Land today, covering business of law and technology.
I blame LAW land, or
yeah, I blame the I blame lots of things, but I've been having network problems too. So if I kind of skip out or my stuff comes in weird, that's probably the reason why, not because I'm scatterbrained.
So well, welcome all. And so last week when we finished up here, we didn't get to Steve Embry had done a story that we had wanted to get to, and we ran out of time. And coincidentally, when I asked Jeff what some of the stories that he was interested in talking about from the last couple of weeks, he said, "Oh, it's Steve Embry's story." So there we go, Steve. We're going to have you cue it up, kick it off today with the story you wrote about cloud versus on-prem.
Sure. Well, as I recall, one of the reasons we didn't get to my story last week was we all wanted to bitch about ILTA for a while, but maybe we'll start off on a more positive note.
Bitch was the word,
I talked to David Carnes, who's with CasePoint, which is a cloud-based e-discovery provider, and I've known David for a while. He's always got an interesting take on stuff, and this his take on the lasting legacy coming out of the pandemic was sort of interesting. His view was that the cloud is now going to be the norm. That on-prem is pretty much dead, but not because of accessibility, the ability to work out of the office, or efficiency, because we can do more things faster. His view is, and he had a quote that I think was in my article. He said that people come for efficiency but stay for AI. His view is that the ability to leverage artificial intelligence and analytics for those people that use a sophisticated cloud provider like CasePoint is going to provide so many advantages and be such a catalyst for more analytics and more sophisticated analysis, that's going to be sort of the lasting legacy. And I think it's kind of interesting talking about it this week, now that we seem to be coming out of the pandemic, and the discussions are more and more about what's remote work going to be like, and what are firms going to expect about coming back to the office. And it may well be that while it's the focus of the debate, David may very well be right that it'll become a sort of a so what, and really the issue is what can we now do with cloud-based services that on-prem couldn't provide. And I thought it was kind of just an interesting discussion, because I hadn't really thought about it that way. I'd been more focusing on, we got remote work and everybody's going to want to work from home or work from wherever, and that may be looking at the cloud as an analytical source of material more than anything else. So that was my take.
But I highlighted it in my pinhawk because I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I'm a huge believer in the cloud. Our firm, we pretty much uplifted everything into our Azure farm. There's really nothing of value left on-prem. And so when COVID hit, it was 15 minutes of my senior Azure engineer to upgrade and expand our remote access. And we were in like Flint, everything's already there. And I was in a practice meeting, and one of our practice chairs, a senior member of the firm, talked about the fact that, somebody made an offhand comment about not being in the office in 6 months. It's like, okay, all the paper in your office, you don't need. If you're doing it right, if you've digitized and moved things forward, all that stuff you don't need. And I think that's a huge issue. But you've got different size firms, different size clients with different issues. As my grandfather would say, the devil's always in the details, right? I mean, if you've got geofencing issues, then some cloud computing may not be for you. When I did a lot of consulting in Canada, anything that was a US-based cloud solution, nobody wanted to touch. We start with the Patriot Act and everything subsequent to that. Nobody wants to touch a US cloud-based solution. So you have to have the stuff locally. You've got the massive firms that are not turning on a dime, that have clients that are still telling them no materials in the cloud. And I love David. David and I actually worked together when we were at Crowell and Mooring together. He was a smart guy, brilliant guy. But when you talk about things, even something as simple as e-discovery, right? E-discovery as the poster child for attorney technology usage doesn't play real well, because they have a lot of attorneys that don't know a lot about it, don't use it, certainly don't use it to the extent it could be. So I'm not as convinced that you're going to stay for the blank, stay for the AI. If you're talking about AI that's kind of like the Google AI, everybody uses AI on a daily basis if that's the level of AI you're talking about. If you're talking about AI that requires training and so on, proper staff, which not a lot of law firms have, not a lot of corporate law departments have in-house, then that I think is a story altogether different.
Yeah,
go ahead, Zach. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh, I was just going to expand on that last point, because that's exactly what I was going to say too, is it's less about specifically what the technology is for me, like AI or machine learning, what have you, and more the use cases that come out of it. Everybody's looking for ease of use right now. And you see it in a lot of legal technologies where people, more than anything, are upgrading their UIs, just making everything as easy to use as possible. So that's what I think ultimately people are staying for. And yeah, AI can have a big piece of that, especially when you become used to using automation and making your life as easy as possible. But I'm not sure it's specifically the AI that people are staying for. It's more the quality of life improvements.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, Zach, to what you just said, and I think David probably would agree with you. And it is, I think it's always interesting to me that we get all these things coming out of the e-discovery field, and it's a lot of it are tools that make lawyers work more efficient, right? And it's because most lawyers bill by the hour. Sometimes they're not as quick to adopt efficiency tools. But when it comes to e-discovery and they're reviewing 10 million documents in a 2-week time period, or being slapped with a fine by the court, all of a sudden it's a lot easier to get them to adopt it. And so I wonder if, as we move forward with more sophisticated and easy to use programs, whether the fact that some lawyers have gotten used to these tools with e-discovery and more, they may make them more willing to adapt and more. Yeah, AI sometimes can be a misnomer. I really think it's more the analytical and automation and efficiency programs that you mentioned, Zach, that people are going to come out of this more used to.
Do you think that, so one of the things, actually, I've got a sort of story that maybe to touch on after this about the cloud, but Jeff, do you find that one of my things that I think is curious is that people were I think cloud is a no-brainer. Cloud has been a massive acceleration due to the pandemic. I still think that there's a lot of glossing over. What do you mean by cloud? Like you've shifted yours to put it into Azure, but so what does it mean? And also, it's quite complex, isn't it? In some instances, if you've got what I've referred to as the spaghetti junction, in terms of actually practically moving to the cloud, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that there's, at the same time as we're seeing some proof, of people shifting to the cloud, and anecdotally hearing it, at the same time, there's still a lot of complexity.
Well, you trade off some things. I mean, part of our decision to go to the cloud was, I want IT to focus on the business and the practice of law. That's where the return on the investment is. The plumbing, not so much. Yes, it has to work. Trains have to run on time, whatever analogy you want to use. But there's no real value add if all my IT department focuses on is the plumbing. So the more I can dig into the business and the practice of law, applying that technology, getting the use case of the adoption numbers up, the better off you are. I mean, so you're right in that you've got a whole set of complexity. And if, quite frankly, if you try to run your cloud solution like you run your on-prem solution, you're going to fail. You have to learn to adjust. I tell my staff all the time, we have to run at the speed of the cloud. There is no option at that point where NetDocs or Mimecast or Office 365 or Microsoft's Azure, they don't send nice, neat little emails saying that, this is going to be updated. And yeah, oh, sure, you can wait this long and you can wait 6 months for the magical convergence of, Office and all the tools you've got and the operating system. Those days are totally dead. If you're not running at the speed of the cloud, then the cloud's running over you.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm trying to square this discussion with that Adderant survey that came out this week. I know a lot of us probably wrote about it, the Law and Legal Technology Survey, which said, among other things, that 92% of firms said they were totally prepared for the advent of the pandemic, and that it was no big deal when it came along. When asked about moving
now,
what they want to move to the cloud, the top things they say they want to move to the cloud is what? Document management systems or practice management systems. I mean, pretty pedestrian kinds of stuff here. So I don't know how that squares.
I think that report had a rose-colored cover, did it not?
I think it did. As a matter of fact.
I do a lot of.
With hindsight, it seemed like with hindsight they were already
smaller.
But so just to briefly mention that, I wrote about, were you saying about it being pedestrian, Bob? So I wrote about this this company Assertus. It's an I-managed document. They do the implementation, and 90% of their deployments or implementations over the past year have been I-managed cloud, which I thought was, because we talk a lot about this in theory and we talk a lot about it anecdotally, and so they're saying this was a financial sort of their financial report for the year, and I just thought that stat speaks volumes, because it's actual concrete. It was concrete. Right? This is 90% of the work that we've done in the last year has been cloud, which I just thought was quite astonishing and interesting and good. I think it's the right way to go. But
yeah. Probably should move on to another topic. And Jeff, as our guest here, it actually kind of fits with this conversation a little bit. But you had come across some interesting stuff on the hybrid workplace.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really great stuff. I mean, again, we were talking a little bit before we turned the cameras on. Everybody's talking about what does the return look like. Some firms have already returned. Some firms, you're reading about giving up 40% of their physical space, some 25%. Some people did a lot of restructuring, shall we say, during COVID. I find it amazing that even a year after COVID, that people are willing to predict what their clients are going to want in the post-COVID world. Here in the United States, you got Pennsylvania and some other states now lifting mask requirements and so on. But I just don't know how you can. I mean, we're still, as a firm, we're looking at what do our clients want us to be able to do? What do we need to be able to do to adapt to the way they're going to be adapting going forward in whatever that hybrid model is? And I think there's certainly, it's a safe prediction to say that, I'm going to be working from home part of the time, that a lot of my meetings will be video conference based, that our clients are going to request and require that in part as cost savings, less travel, the whole 9 yards associated with that. But to be able to say that, all those different pieces and parts about, I mean, from a bar requirements and websites, some, I think it's Florida bar, there's a couple of bars that are fairly restrictive on that. If you have to list all your offices, does that mean now that if I've got 300 lawyers working from home, I now list 325 offices as part of that? How do I enforce clean desk policies? I answer security questionnaires from our clients on a regular basis, that I have to answer specific physical and other security issues for our 10 offices. How do you answer that when you're now talking about there's no key card on your front door, there's no electronic locks or anything else, there's no video cameras. Well, actually, there may be.
Actually, there are lots of them.
Video doorbell, yeah. So scratch that one, but that whole thing on who do you bring back? Do you bring them back for particular? And that's what caught me in that one article was task-based, right? We all want to be back together. Some tasks we do much better alone in our home office. Other tasks we can't do as well. We do better in a group, collaborating and so on. So, figuring out how you get those schedules all to combine in terms of people in the office or people working from home, I just thought was a fascinating idea, given that some firms seem to have set their direction already so very, very clearly.
Yeah.
So today I had a chance to hear from Timothy Bowers, who's a managing partner at VLP Law Group, which has been virtual since 2008, I think. And I think many of you have covered the firm, and it was really interesting because they haven't had too much of a change, if at all, during the pandemic, and they have a distributed fully remote workforce. But one of the things he said struck me as I was reading through these articles, Jeffrey, is that to make these work, you have to have a really deliberate plan. Culture has to be, even in an in-person environment, culture has to be pretty deliberate if you want a strong workplace culture. And especially with distributed or remote workforce, it needs to be deliberate. And so far, I haven't really seen much of that, especially during the pandemic. Everybody was scrambling. And so that made perfect sense. But now, as you're coming up with plans and giving up office space, how deliberate are these firms in how they're approaching these hybrid teams? So it'll be interesting. And I just posted something about it. I'm expecting some great successes with people who are really planning and working hard at this, and then some spectacular fails. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I think it's a bit like, I think we discussed at one point the notion of a hybrid conference. And it's very easy to do an all virtual conference. It's pretty easy to do an all in-person conference, but when you try to mix the two, you get a lot of practical problems. And I think we're going to see the same thing when it comes to remote work. An all virtual firm, they've been doing it a long time. They know how it works. They know what to do. Once you shift and you have half the people in the office and half the people at home, and since there's no real deliberate thinking about training or equal opportunity for mentors and mentorship, assignments and all that sort of thing, things that many law firms are frankly not terribly good at.
Right, exactly, Steve. They were already struggling, and now, now that they've kind of stopped in their tracks almost with summer programs and advancement, and good training programs, and even the VLP. What I was talking about was they don't hire junior lawyers, so they're counting on the firms to do this training. So if it's not happening, who's doing it?
Yeah, and training is always kind of interesting, because the big argument is, well, so much of the training happens informally at the at the coffee stand, a coffee pot, or bumping into each other in a hall. And frankly, that's a terrible way to train. If that's our training program as a profession, that means I may happen to bump into the really smart lawyer and get good training, and Bob may dump into the not so smart and get terrible training, and that's what has happened in a lot of law firms. Honestly, very few firms sit down and say, what does it mean to be a good lawyer, and let's train to that, which is what we'd have to do in a hybrid kind of situation.
I keep wondering, I think I've made this point before, but I keep wondering in these hybrid firms of the present and or future, whether we end up with a class system within the firm of lawyers and higher level professionals and others for whom the hybrid system is not so amenable. It's kind of easier for a lawyer to say, I'm going to stay home and work on the brief today, and I've got meetings with clients in the office tomorrow. But I think a lot of the support staff and even some of the allied professionals in firms may not, the firms may not give them as much flexibility around working from home or working in the office over the long term. So I think that's, and I haven't really seen any articles that kind of address that in any meaningful way. I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen there.
The Littler survey that came out this week sort of alludes to that. They say that there's a real discrepancy between what people are expecting and what firms are planning and delivering. So they said 71% of employers surveyed, and there was a really big number, said that their employees would prefer a hybrid model, but 28% plan to have most of them return full time. So there seems to be, and there was just a whole bunch of, I won't go on about it now, but I can post it, but there's quite a lot of discrepancies between what the expectation of employees are and what employers are actually delivering. And I wonder that people have talked about doing surveys, have talked about engaging with their employees. I wonder to what extent they're actually doing it, because that really seems to be the most sensible thing to make sure that there isn't that kind of breakdown in expectation.
Yeah. Also, just point out, I dropped a link in the chat, this Boston Globe article, totally somewhat unrelated. I mean, it's not about talking about law at all, but just this behavioral psychologist wrote this interesting article on why the hybrid workplace won't last over the long term for psychological reasons more than anything else. I thought that was interesting.
That was a good article, and it's like the rest of you. You kind of watch all the chatter that goes on, and for a long time, the chatter seemed to be remote is great. We'll never go back. This is going to change the world. And now the chatter seems to be we're going back soon. And what was the one firm that said we're strongly encourage that you return to the office, but you don't have to, but you're strongly encouraged. So I wonder whether a year from now we'll be sitting here with most people back in the office, but we'll see. That plus the fact that everybody wants to get together with people again, which is also kind of a force that will drive us back to status quo, maybe.
Wants to
when you
escape
have
these walls. Sorry.
Yeah.
when you
And I
have
should say-
numbers that kind of self-regulate. So, if you've got a billable hour requirement, then, that's fairly transparent, whether you're in the office, in your home office, or anything else. So your productivity still has a significant measure. If you're talking about allied professionals, I like that term, Bob, that don't have those kinds of requirements. I mean, lots of different firms, some of the Slack groups that I'm part of, talking about, what kind of big brother monitors the firms have to have in place in order to see how productive staff is. The allied professionals are outside of the office. And it's an interesting play because, like I said, the lawyer, the paralegal, those with time requirements, billable hour requirements, all that's self-regulating. It's very obvious whether you're doing the work or not. And in the other instances, not so much.
Before we move
Right.
on from
Yeah.
this topic,
Yeah.
Caroline, you want to give a plug? You want to give a plug for Clubhouse that's coming up next week?
Yes, thank you, Steve. Fancy mentioning that on Clubhouse at 12:30 ET, 5:30 GMT. We'll be talking about working from home and the future of hybrid and all of these topics on Clubhouse. So follow. You can find our club is called Legal Tech Trending News. Hopefully, most of us will be on there, at least some of us. So come and join us.
And
Steve and I
that,
definitely will be there.
Also, the allied professionals is certainly not my term, but there was at least one firm, I'm blanking on which one it was, that formally adopted that as the terminology of the firm. You can't say that non-lawyer word in that firm, which I like. The clock is ticking on our time here, and we haven't talked about CLOC yet. So Zach, you want to kick it off? I know you wrote about them this week, or you. Maybe you didn't write about him.
I could not possibly follow with a better segue than that, so I'll just jump into it. No, I mean, CLOC was this week. We talked a little bit about it last week, how, especially for some people, it seemed to spring up kind of out of nowhere. I think that's partially the function of it being fully virtual, like so many other conferences. But there's just a lot happening around CLOC right now. We also talked last week a little bit about Mary O'Carroll, legal ops at Google previously, who's now going to Ironclad, left her post at CLOC at the same time. Mike Haven is the new president of CLOC, and we talked with him this week, just kind of plans for the future of the organization and what he foresees as CLOC's place in the ecosystem moving forward. Very similar to the trajectory that CLOC was on previously, he's very into bringing outside voices into the legal ops sphere. So that means more legal technology companies, more alternative legal service providers, more law firms coming in and having an actual seat at the table. I think his quote to us is something along the lines of, we're not looking to necessarily completely open up our board yet, but it's something that's on the table. So especially for a very influential legal ops organization like that, I think it's very interesting that being the direction they're moving forward, because I think CLOC grew kind of as this place for legal ops professionals specifically to come, talk, interact in a way that hadn't really existed before because legal ops is so nascent. But as legal ops has continued to grow, bringing in those new voices, I think they see as a necessity as much as anything else, just because legal ops as a discipline has gotten such a large voice these days. So in order to continue being part of the conversation, that's kind of what they feel they need to do. And I think we also reported a bunch from CLOC's programming this week, and I think you kind of saw that reflected there. There's a lot of conversation about, okay, so where do we move from here, basically, now that Legal Ops has arrived. So, I mean, I'm guessing they're planning on going back in person next year. Wouldn't surprise me. Most people are. And especially when we get that first in-person CLOC again, it'll be interesting to see, honestly, the makeup of who's there as much as anything else. Whether it's going to be more law firms, more legal service providers, in addition to continuing to grow the legal ops sphere.
So I'll throw in my little update on Bucerius Legal Tech Essentials, partly because Stephanie Corey, who was one of the founders of CLOC, was one of the speakers for the series. It's an intense 16 session, 90-minute a session series through May, sponsored by the law school and hosted by Dan Katz, who's at UIC Kent, Chicago, and Dirk Hartung in Hamburg. And it's really well done and well moderated. But the thing that the thing I wanted to relate to legal ops is that most of this is geared towards legal ops. There's a huge global lawyer audience, but many of the people are non-legal professionals who are interested in this space, who are in technology, working in access to justice, opening up courts, different aspects of the law. And there's all this discussion in the threads about certifications in legal ops, which don't really exist except in maybe LLM programs or advanced programs at law schools that cost an enormous amount of money, that don't make sense in the pay model currently for legal ops in the not maybe higher level firms, but kind of some lower level or smaller firms, smaller companies. So I just thought that was interesting. And one of the things that Stephanie said is that she wished that CLOC had taken the lead on developing certifications for legal ops. And that so I kind of wondered, it seemed like that's a regular debate. And I'm curious kind of if you feel that way too, Zach, like that there's some tension there about, clearly they're starting to open it up, but maybe, how far they open it up and what certification means, and whether that competes with others in the space that creates some tension.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I know when Connie Brenton was still at CLOC, I had the conversation with her kind of along those lines, and she said, well, I mean, between the combination of JDs and MBAs, I think that kind of covers it. Like those different skill sets kind of combined in one. And as long as you can bring both business and law in the same place, then I think you're good. I obviously, a lot of people kind of, to your point, disagree with that and would like to see the specific certification. I think the question for me is what that would entail, just because the current legal ops is at the intersection of so many different things in trying to talk to the GC, trying to talk to the IT department, trying to talk to procurement, how exactly you define kind of the legal ops in many organizations is at a different maturity as well, where some are really empowered to actually make these decisions. Others are just kind of managing decisions that have already been made. So since there's not really that defined what is legal ops in every organization, I think it would be very tough to try and put something like that together.
Yeah, and even in this series, they highlighted that issue by having a panel of legal ops heads at 3 extremely different companies. And, and it really comes down to the nature of legal, especially in a corporate legal department, the nature of the legal services and what legal does for that company. So that to your point, I think that makes it even more complicated, but there are some really common threads and themes for legal ops teams.
What's the argument for certification? I'm not sure I even get it. Why is it important?
It goes beyond, it would lay foundational skills on legal technologies and technology in business. So it's that multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary approach. So you wouldn't have to be a lawyer. But it's more advanced than a project manager.
I think it kind of would help sorry, it would help in terms of as an area matures, and when you're looking at hiring and all of this kind of stuff, and if you're looking at mobility and all, I don't know, just as a market matures, I think typically that you do end up having recognized standards, don't you? It makes it easier for people to move. It makes it easier for you to understand what someone's experience is and benchmark it, I think. I take your point completely that it's a tough one though.
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, you have to be careful about making everything technology based. So my degree is computer science, mathematics. Started out, my first job out of college was complex litigation support with Rust Consulting before the world called it e-discovery. And I was very technical. I could IPL the Wang VS and manage the systems and everything else. Today, my job is actually a fraction that actually deals with the technology. It's implementation, it's change management. So I don't know that, I mean, we used to joke about magic PCs, right? When the world first was moving to PC and PC networks, you know, PCs were going to do all these magical things, and of course they didn't. But I mean, that's, to me, smacks of the magic technology piece. You know, it's people, it's process, it's technology. It's in that order for a reason. And I would be concerned that, you know, a technology certification really wouldn't provide ultimately what you're looking to have in an individual. What I think is interesting in all of this is who's going to get the holy grail of membership, corporate, private law firm, vendor, to use the biggest of the triangles. I know it's really kind of a hexagon at this point with all the little pieces, but I mean, to me, that's the group that's going to go forward. There will always be, I think, something for individuals, the lawyers over here, the law firms over here, the corporate law over here, the vendors over here. But the very first, I guess you could call it a plug, the very first alt conference was amazing in that sitting down at the table for the conversation, at least for the first time that I ever experienced in 30 plus years, was all three of those players around the same table having that conversation. So it's a function of law firm, this is what we think we want to offer. Corporate law, we don't want anything to do with that. Vendor, you guys are nuts because you can't build or design that in a way that's going to work anyway. That's the holy grail. And if CLOC is going to be the one that's going to be able to reach it by bringing everybody in, kudos to them. But everybody's looking for it, and it's been as evasive as the holy grail has been.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zach.
Oh, I was just going to say there was a question in the chat that kind of gets to that too, which was ACC or CLOC, essentially, which is going to be the most innovative moving forward. But kind of to your point, Jeff, I think ultimately they might be serving two different audiences, because ACC would be the ones that are specifically looking for that legal ops networking to make it super corporate legal department specific. And more than anything else, be able to interface with GCs and kind of that back and forth. But if you're looking for the entire ecosystem where legal ops fits in with their outside law firms, with their legal technology providers, then that's CLOC's probably what you're looking for there.
But it's going to be so fascinating with Mike as to, because obviously they've wrestled with this for such a long time. Like, they didn't want to let law firms into properly in, because they didn't want to dilute, because obviously they used their CLOC was primarily, as we all know, like a kind of training, networking environment, and they didn't want to dilute that by effectively letting the seller in, which is a law firm. So I've spoken to them a few times about this, and obviously then they transitioned to, right, we're going to let law firms in, but actually they weren't really, they were kind of let in, but not really. They were, if you actually looked at what was going on underneath, they were kind of, well, yeah, you can come and be part of the partnership, but they weren't allowed us in the networking groups and like properly in. So I think that you see this softening, they have this potential to bring everybody in, and it sounds like Mike's going very much in that direction, which I think is what everyone's craving. But it'd be really interesting to see how they protect, because one of the things that people love is this environment where they can learn and network without those other influences in. So it'd be really, I'm fascinated to see how far they take it.
Yeah. Why don't we move on to another topic? Victoria, what's interested you this week?
Yeah, it was an article written by my colleague in Philadelphia, Max Mitchell, for the Legal Intelligencer, and they got a scoop about defunding for tech in Pennsylvania, and that how it's putting, like, they're not able what is it? They won't be able to have like their their court budget got slashed, and they won't be able to have enough for their, what is it? Statewide criminal dockets and court information system, their common pleas computer management system, starting in July if they don't get enough funding. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Like we talk about here about like, oh, with COVID-19 and remote working and courts kind of being innovative by having like these remote court proceedings, but just like the reality of some states, they don't have enough funding for it. And just kind of like, we've been talking about during this podcast about like, oh, the talk was just kind of like, oh, remote working, law firms, how they work is going to change. And Steve kind of said like, we're starting to see that even tempered down to like, maybe by next year, everyone will be back in office. So I just thought it was kind of interesting, like the realities of budgets, and that some courts really can't innovate or use technology. They don't even have enough money to have the basics. So I thought it was just like kind of interesting, kind of puts me back in the reality of like, we would love to see like access to justice is needed and technology can play a big part in that. But it's just like for a lot of jurisdictions, they struggle for the basics. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be a big problem because the backlog of cases, and I hear lawyers talking about it all the time, the backlog of cases that have been put on hold since the pandemic. And with criminal cases, I mean, it's even worse because you have people incarcerated, right? And the right to a speedy trial is now like almost a joke, right? Your speedy trial is what, 2 years from now because there's 10,000 other cases in front of you, and yet at the same time we're going to reduce funding to streamline any of that. It's a pretty serious problem, I think.
No, I really think well, I'm sorry, Caroline, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
No. Oh no, sorry, Bob. I was just going to say, do you remember when we talked about the judges who had to get their own Zoom accounts?
Yeah, in Georgia.
Right.
Yeah, that was, and we were like, wow. Okay, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and for that story, like it was an early story that stemmed from when I reached out to state courts. Pretty much, I kept it to like where ALM has publications, and I reached out to Pennsylvania, and they said like, oh, for Zoom, are you guys providing funding? And the spokesperson just said it's up to the individual jurisdictions like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, because, and they mentioned the budget hits, they can't provide that. And it's just kind of like with those Georgia courts, I didn't hear anything about it being like budget constraints, but just like the realities of it, like even the basics and kind of like, hey, we need to deliver this so people can have access to like speedier, like not necessarily court trials, but proceedings. They have to come out of pocket for it. And just like in this example, like something that's very, courts in the United States might not be that tech savvy, but this is just kind of something that you lean on for justice and to make sure that everything is efficient, and they might lose the access to that. And that could be very detrimental.
One of the things that I'll add
the
on
article.
the court, I'm sorry, go ahead, Victor.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, the only thing that I'll add on the court is the only reason that I am keeping Internet Explorer around is for certain courts. Yeah, so you want to talk about innovation and basic level budgets, none of that's been addressed, let alone any of the new add-on stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked to a lot of judges in the course of different things, and I get the sense that, you know, a lot of them understand the idea to modernize the courts and to advance their use of technology, but it just keeps coming back to budget, and they just don't have significant budgets to, as you say, just to even to address the basics in a lot of cases, let alone major overhauls. And I really think that is, you know, part of why we are going to see a surge in alternative online dispute resolution programs now. I mean, there've just been a number of them that I've written about just over the last month or so, kind of, that have come out. You know, ODR has been around for a long time and kind of never fully taken hold, but it seems to be, you know, this is another one of those things where if it's going to have a moment, this is it. And I think it's having a moment.
I think you're exactly right, Bob. That's with this is there's no excuse not to allow a third party to come in, especially if the courts aren't going to be prioritized. And I'm not saying the courts aren't prioritizing it, it's that they don't have the budget to prioritize the basic infrastructure. So I'm sorry, Victor, I'm moving. I'll shut up now for you.
That's all right. It's just like, I'm just doing a quick read of the article. I don't know how much of it is that and how much of it is, there was a specific law that was passed which allows the state to take money out of, out of the funds of the court, like for fines and court fees and stuff, which raises a whole other issue regarding like the constitutionality of those fines, and the idea of courts being a money-making system and whatnot. But taking out that money and then putting it into school safety, which, for someone who grew up in Pittsburgh and went to school in Pittsburgh, the idea that the state would put money into schools is actually pretty amusing to me. But then that raises some more issues about like sort of like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. And so I mean with this issue, it seems like there's a lot more complexity and a lot more like other things going on besides just like typical backlog, COVID related or not or whatnot. There's specific fiscal issues that are at play, and some idea of like prioritizing certain areas of the state as opposed to other things and whatnot. So I don't know what kind of real conclusions we can draw from this specific example, but it does kind of raise interesting questions just overall regarding like how should we treat court systems? Should we prioritize them? How should they be allowed to raise revenue and be able to get revenue from the state and things like that?
Yeah, Victor, while you got the floor, you had a couple of stories this week you want to talk about involving cybersecurity. You want to tell us about those?
So yeah, for those of you, if you're in a part of the country that's being affected by the gas shortage, sorry about that. Hope that resolves itself soon. I think I was in New York when Hurricane Sandy hit, and I think we had a gas shortage for like a week, but everybody freaked out. So I can only imagine what it's like now with an entire region of the country that's hoarding gas like it's toilet paper from a year ago. But anyway. One thing I thought was interesting was just, the Biden administration released what President Biden signed an executive order regarding, cybersecurity protocols and whatnot. And, you're reading over it, it seems pretty self-explanatory, and you kind of wonder why they weren't doing this stuff before. Like it requires IT service providers to tell the government about breaches that could impact the U.S. network. It creates like standardized rules and playbooks for the federal government to respond to whenever there's a cyber incident. It pushes the federal government to upgrade cloud services and things like that. And again, you kind of wonder why this stuff wasn't in play already. It seems like it'd be a good thing for the federal government, especially considering all the cyber episodes that we've had over the last couple of years and whatnot. But then that kind of ties into the whole the fallout from the Jones Day hack that happened a few months ago. But this week it came out that, like, especially here in Chicago, that there were some emails that got leaked that made our administration here not look so good with regards to some police incidents that have happened. Obviously the mayor came out and said that the emails were taken out of context and blah blah blah. And according to Jones Day, like it wasn't their actual server that got breached. It was like a third party vendor that they used. But then that also raises more questions. Like, okay, well, why didn't you what did you not vet your third party properly? What kind of issues are regarding your relationship with a contractor or with a third party provider or things like that. So, and who knows? I mean, we were talking about this stuff earlier. Maybe this is why lawyers and law firms might be afraid to like go to a full cloud model, even though it's not necessarily valid. But you see these headlines and you see this kind of coverage in the press, and you're like, well, I don't want that. I don't want to get in. I don't want to deal with that. So I'm just gonna do what's always worked for me.
Yeah, of course, the ransomware stuff has nothing to do with whether they go to a cloud model or not. But
yeah, somebody raised with me today the question of what duties does a law firm have with respect to paying ransomware in order to prevent disclosure of client confidences. And I hadn't really thought about it. It's kind of an interesting sort of ethical dilemma. On the one hand, it seems like paying ransomware, you just shouldn't. It's like kidnapping, you shouldn't do, but lots of businesses do. But then on the other hand, I mean, they are your clients' confidences. So this kind of could be a sticky issue, I guess.
It's a fascinating question.
There's a number of things associated. I mean, the Treasury Department, I think it was, issued some new rulings that basically makes it a crime to pay certain people ransom. So that gets factored into your patient. And then I think it was Ars Technica had an article that talked about the percentage of people that actually, once you paid the ransom, how many people, what percentage of people actually get 100% of what they, I forget the number. I think it was 17% got 50% of their data back or unlocked. So you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee, and you potentially get yourself in trouble with the Treasury Department.
Right. So in addition to ethical concerns, there are legal concerns. I mean, I think Colonial, we all know the Colonial paid it, right? That was said. I think they paid the ransom. But there was, over the past year, there were a couple of very notorious cases of law firms that we've talked about. The one here, the law firm that represented many celebrities, and their client documents were being posted on the dark web for all to see. And I don't know what came of that eventually, but I'm suspecting that law firm probably ended up coughing up the ransom. Does anybody know what happened to that?
No, but I do know that what they're starting to do is auction the data off, which is a different problem altogether. Jeff, you're nodding, obviously, which is so, and that kind of makes you even more powerless, right? Yeah. I mean, because that means it's hugely valuable. And so I find that kind of fascinating. I don't know whether there was an auction involved in that particular case, but Jeff.
Yeah. I've read several stories, yes.
Yeah. I want to mention a story that I did this week on the Utah Sandbox approving 2 more programs, alternative legal services providers in Utah. I mean, they've approved a number of them now. But last week I talked about a story in Arizona under its alternative business structure program, where they had approved the first 3 alternative business structures in Arizona, and those first 3 approvals were basically financial advisory and tax advisory firms that kind of already bordered on law and tax, and they didn't seem all that obviously related to access to justice issues. So I thought it was notable, the programs that were approved in Utah this week, because they, I think, much more clearly demonstrate how this kind of a sandbox can address access to justice. There are 2 programs, both developed in conjunction with the Innovation for Justice program at the University of Arizona Law School. And they both deal with basically medical debt, which, as we all know, is a huge problem. And they will create a couple of different pilot programs in Utah for non-lawyers or allied professionals, I guess I should call them, to deliver limited scope legal services, again, without lawyer supervision, just directly on their own, to individuals who have medical issues, including medical debt. And I think we all know that so much of what happens when somebody has a major medical problem are all the other fallouts that occur from it, in terms of legal issues and family issues and everything else. So I think it's really cool that they did that. I think it's just a great example of how these programs can in fact come up with programs that address access to justice issues in very meaningful ways.
And kind of to that point, the fact that it was extended 7 years a week or 2 ago, hopefully the more that you start to see programs like that, it might spark a little spark of innovation that says, oh, we have 7 years, let's develop something like that ourselves and see if we can get into that program. So here's to hoping that it's something that just starts a snowball rolling a little bit.
Yeah.
2 things. We've talked a lot about at what point do you stop defining something as a startup? So, extending that to 7 years almost still doesn't seem like enough time, but it's necessary to give that lead time. And, there was a lot of criticism in the beginning with these sandboxes that, these big for-profit companies would come in and it wouldn't serve the access to justice missions. So it's good to see these developments.
Yeah. All right. Any good of the order before we wrap up today?
I would note that in addition to CLOC, Legal Week day, year, whatever it is these days. Had a
Legal
day
perpetuity.
this week. Yeah, had a day this week. And one of the interesting discussions, and I was going to do a post on it, but haven't got there yet, was Tony West of Uber talked a little bit about the Uber Preferred Counsel program and what kind of inquiries they are making of law firms. Really getting into the nitty-gritty of committee structures, management, origination, all these various and sundry things, which, as we've talked about before, maybe what has to happen to force law firms to be more diverse. I don't know, and I don't know whether Uber's really doing it or whether he was just is one of those things we say we're going to do. But I thought it was an interesting. I had not heard AGC go to that kind of lengths before to talk about the types of questions that they were now asking.
Really interesting. Good. All right. Well,
Steve, you
yeah,
just slowed down and then sped up. So like you must.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to forgive me laughing. I wasn't laughing at the content. It was just like it was really slow, and then it was really fast.
Yeah.
I was sort of wondering if I said something funny and
really
didn't know it.
I was the only one that couldn't contain my face. Typically.
I was on a call the other day, and I had a virtual background like I do now, and for some reason, I guess the way the sun was shining, it looked like I had no head.
Yeah. Well, I'm flashing back to the day I tried to do this show from the front seat of my car in a parking lot in a rural area of Florida, and it didn't work too well. So, well, hey Jeff, thanks a lot for joining us today. It was really great to have your insights, and really appreciated it. And thanks to all of you, and thanks to everybody for watching and listening. And we will be back next week with another roundup of the week's news. So join us then.
Don't forget our clubhouse.
Don't forget Clubhouse on Wednesday at 12:30 ET.
Bye, everyone.